Today on the Soundiron podcast, our guest is Maks Histibe, a versatile music producer, sound designer, and visual director with his company Mask Movement, based out of Ukraine. He's known for his diverse music style, incorporating electronic, bass, and cinematic elements. He's an outstanding multimedia artist and colleague and friend of Soundiron. So, Maks, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to see you guys, finally.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Maks. Well, let's start at the beginning. Do you remember the first time we worked together, Maks? I want to say it was like 8 years ago.
Yes, and it was actually my first, I think, one of the first official commercial video projects that I ever did, like on the international level.
Yeah, you did. I think the first major thing you did for us was the Elysium Harp video, where you did a lot of beautiful drone footage.
Exactly.
Those were the woods north of Kiev.
Yeah, actually, I combined the footage from Kiev, from, I don't even remember the other locations, but I think it was somewhere in the center of Ukraine when I was traveling at that time. And I was just trying to collect some beautiful footages of the forest and then added the footage from Kiev. So that's how I combined everything together. And then there was a time when we had ability to fly drones here in Kiev, and I called to one of my friends to take the drone with him, and that's how we made it. We made like, I don't know, maybe an hour trip to the center of the forest. It was really in the deep on the forest, and then we also found an interesting footage of the little train that was coming from the one part of the city to another. And yeah, the video is still cool. I still like it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, it was interesting when we first started talking to you and working with you. You had a really distinct visual style that I had not really seen any other visual artists doing at the time. It was like a mixture of, I want to say, abstract modern art, but then sort of intense, quick cut video editing. And you just had a very bold style that we liked. Just unique, not at all like what I was seeing everywhere else. So it was really cool to work with you, and you would give us an entirely different take on a theme than would have occurred to us, you know. And so it was neat to work with you on that level.
Oh, really? I really appreciate it, because actually, when I started creating music and then video, my goal was to inspire. And I think the goal was achieved, that when we started working together, you was inspired by this, not just you just received the video and that's it, but it gave you some other ideas for other directions. So I think it was really cool to do this. I actually started making videos. I don't know. I never had a desire to make it something like commercial or something like that. I just started making it because I really liked it, and I wanted to create something different and to create it as much good as possible in my situation. And that's why I started making videos in parallel with music, because I really wanted to do this.
So were you doing music first and then video, or was it the
Yeah.
other way around? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I actually started making music in the very, I think maybe I was around 14 years old or something like that. I started recording rap records here in Kiev
All
myself
right.
with friends. I think it was maybe 2003 or something like that. It was the time when the records of Eminem and 50 Cent were popular, and there were bands like Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park and System of a Down, and I was inspired by this all, and I was trying to create something. I was a kid at the time, but then it slowly transformed into a passion with electronic music, with breakbeat and drum and bass.
Okay.
You know, it was like that, because at that time there were no YouTube, there were no record labels, and there were no TV channels that were able to broadcast rap or radio, especially here in Kiev, in Ukraine in general. At that time, when you was able to see some rap video on TV, it was something special, because
Yeah.
it was different here, I think, compared to the United States. So then I think I slowly moved to electronic music, and I started experiment. I started making my experiments in EJ. Maybe you know this software, very, very old software.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. I kind of miss the old days of where things were hard to find. Like where there was no YouTube. Now everything's so quick. It's almost like people don't appreciate it as much. But back then, when it was like an album came out, every time you go to a record store, it's sold out, and you're just like trying so hard to get it in your hands.
Yeah, and here it was even different situation, because I think at that time we even was not able to have official releases available here. So I think at that time there were a lot of pirate copies of some records, because not all labels were represented here. So we had
Mhm.
something like a street market here, and people were just selling cassettes, even not CD.
Mhm.
I remember when I was a kid, when I was trying to access the internet, I had this long telephone cable, and I was trying to download something. When I was trying to download something, it was very slow, and it can took me a night to download something like a few music videos or something like that. And when you needed to connect to the internet, you needed to unplug your phone in the room, and you needed to plug the Ethernet cable, and then you needed to buy some card, like a card, and there
Mhm.
were access to the internet. Maybe I don't even, I think it was something like 1 hour or 3 hours or 5 hours of internet. It was like that.
Oh, like it was a limited amount of time that you can
Yeah,
use the
yeah,
internet. Wow.
yeah. And then I remember when I was trying to find something like an interesting information or just pictures, I was visiting the library, and there were a free access to the internet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was maybe 20 years ago, something like that. So it was like that here.
I mean, that's essentially how it was in the very late 80s and early 1990s here. So it was like, I mean, it was a 10-year delay, but now essentially your technical world is about the same as ours. Here we're having a high fidelity live stream. It's interesting how the technology accelerates and kind of levels the playing field and kind of unites everybody everywhere. For us, right when we started, and I want to say, I mean, first getting into sampling development in like 2007, 2006. The internet was where it all was happening. If not for the internet, this entire industry wouldn't exist in any meaningful sense the way it does now.
100%.
It was just CDs and sample banks and loose instrument samples. But the ability to create, well, I was exposed to a lot of my friends were using EJ, and I was exposed to FL Studio or Fruity Loops at the time, and
I'm still
if
using it.
not for the internet, I would have never heard of it. And so I became like a diehard user of that. And then it opened the door for more and more. I got comfortable with that. And then I started, exploring other DAWs and things like that. And, with the ability to communicate with musicians and composers around the world, suddenly that's how we reached out to even start the company, to be able to find customers, to be able to say, we made this cool instrument, and now you on the other side of the planet can buy it and we can exchange, and we didn't have to go to like music stores and try to get them to stock our software or any of that. It was just very person to person. And
It's truly amazing. I agree
yeah,
that internet made significant impact on music and on art in general, and on development in the world. And actually, how I learned even English language, it's because of the internet. That's when I started to communicate with people. I started practice English more and more. And even when I was in school, my English level was not very good. It was difficult for me to communicate and to express my feelings, and it was something else. And nowadays, I realize that new generation of people have this access to information, but at the same time, there is a lot of things going on the internet, and the life is going so fast.
yeah, it's good and bad. Hopefully in the end the balance will be for the good, but at least for now, it's made creators and artists and developers all like able to connect so directly and so quickly, and communicate on a level that's much more everyday, much more, we all have the same kind of equipment, we all have the same kind of experiences in developing. We can share ideas on microphones or software to use, and develop each other's skills really so much more quickly. It's no longer like a walled garden where you've got to go to university to learn how to use audio hardware. Now you can just learn from each other, learn from friends, learn from strangers.
YouTube University.
Exactly. Like a lot of our podcasts
Yes.
and videos are about not just our instruments, but how to do things that
Yeah.
people want to learn how to do in a kind of a very nuts and bolts way without trying to mystify it.
That's how I learned making music. That's how I learned to record samples, how to manipulate with VST plugins, how to install VST plugins, and how to mix and how to add effects. I learned what is sidechain. I learned what is layering and everything because of the internet.
Yeah, it's funny how things snowball because like you might just start doing it just because like, oh, I want to be able to make a beat like this thing, but then once you learn that thing, then it just kind of snowballs if you're one of those people that just kind of get immersed in something and then just go all in. Because I remember like when I first started, I just wanted to be able to record guitar DIs or have like an amp sim, maybe program some drums, and then I didn't really care, or think like, oh, I want to be like a mixing engineer. But then like eventually you're like, oh, I want to learn how to like, how do they make their kick drum sound like that? How do they make their snare drum sound like that? And then it just like evolves from there. And next thing you know, you're doing way more than you initially wanted just because, with the information being out there and the ability to learn it, like, because not everyone has a friend who owns a studio.
Exactly.
I was kind of lucky to have a friend who I was in a band with who owned a studio. And, I would just sit over his shoulder and just watch him and ask questions. And he was super cool about it. So it's like, but now it's like with the internet, you could just go in, type anything. And
I mean, in a weird way, when I started, I was, doing internships at radio stations or at a recording studio, and I learned so much more in the first year after I had left all of that, just exploring on my own with software and like really simple audio interfaces. I just kind of dove in, but a lot of what you would see in studios was kind of, I'm not negging studios, but what I'm saying is a lot of it, they bought that equipment for, a decade before, 2 decades, and a lot of it was prized for its vintage qualities or its industry standard sort of status, but it wouldn't move at the pace of technology at that time, at least. There was just so much happening so quickly and so many new ideas and techniques coming out. I didn't learn most of what I know about engineering from engineers. I learned it from just trying to do stuff and figuring out like, well, I don't like the way that sounds. What if I do this, and just continue to try.
Experiments.
Yeah, I learned more from watching movies or listening to records and liking or disliking things about what I was hearing and experimenting to see if I could, learn from, all right, well, what sounds good and how do I get that? How do I use EQs? How do I use compression? How do I layer? How do I do all of these things? And it was really just the ability to do it on my own at home that made the biggest difference. And I think a lot of people, a lot of our users, even when they go to school to study music, to really get that kind of boost, most of what they really learn about their craft comes from just doing it themselves.
yeah, yeah, learning and applying is honestly the best thing you could ever do, even if it's experimentation,
Yeah.
because at least you're doing something. I think a lot of times it's kind of like people who watch a lot of self-help videos. Like you watch it, you get that little bit of boost, you feel good, and then it just kind of fades. Like there's no real work. It's almost like you're just hearing someone talk and getting an experience, but or watching a video and someone's showing you how to do it. And you're like, oh, this is cool. I feel like I'm doing something, but it's not really until you sit down and start trying stuff. It's like watching a video on mixing or composing. If you don't actually sit and apply the information and internalize it in your own way, it's almost kind of like it doesn't fully do anything for you. It's like things, but you don't have that internalized, and that's where it's just being that person who does it is always going to have more of an effect. When you were doing an internship, like was there anything that you learned in that really stuck with you, or what kind of internship was it? Like one of those sort of like helping around the studio, learn some stuff whenever they want to show you stuff, or was it one of those?
Yeah, basically the compensation was we got to come in and use the studio in the after hours and the weekends if nobody
Mm.
else was using it. My main job was honestly duplicating old archival records and recordings that their customers would send, because it was a recording studio, but they also had a duplication lab there that they would digitize things for people, or convert to essentially digitize the CD, sometimes to digital tape, sometimes just duplicating cassette tapes, because that was still done a lot at the time. Even though this was still late in the 90s, it was still just not a dead form. And so I was using like basically really, I guess, high-end tape recorders, if you can even say such a thing could exist. But like, it had like multiple Dolby modes and all that. And I had to clean the heads every single day. And
Mhm.
I'd have to, I did a little bit of reel-to-reel work there. Although I learned a lot more reel-to-reel work studying radio, because they just made us learn how to actually edit tape, with the diagonal slice and the. For me, that the internship, it taught me, actually there were a few interesting things. One, just try and figure it out when it came to hardware. The few times I got to use the studios in the off hours, I was using it to try to transfer the stuff I had been doing at home with the 4-track into the digital domain, and kind of remix and remaster it using the equipment they had there. They had like a good Lexicon reverb, and then a nice optical compressor from, oh shoot, I forget the name of the company at the time, but it was a really nice optical compressor, and their board. And it was still coming off of a cassette tape that I had been bouncing track after track. So the tape was pretty rough, but it taught me just to do it and keep going until I would at least give myself the sense that I had gone as far as I could. And the other thing it taught me was studio etiquette. Like I had to get the bagels. Go get the bagels from the bagel shop, bring them and lay them out in the lunchroom for all the people who were using the studio, the artists that would come in. And as weird as that is, I still remember that because it taught me, honestly, not just the etiquette in that sense, but like I carried it with me to other future real, like jobs in the audio, where it was more like a kind of a at home environment. It wasn't stiff. It wasn't as formal as I thought it would be. It was very much just people show up in the morning, you eat your bagel, you get your coffee, and you go to work.
Mhm.
And everybody mixed in the same lunchroom, or in the same little, I wouldn't call it a
A
lunchroom.
friendly atmosphere.
Yeah, it's just very informal, very direct. And the artists and the engineers and the interns all mixed and just talked to each other like regular people. And so it removed the mystique in a very good way. It just made it normal. And I think that gave me the confidence to just get out there and do things, because I just decided, I mean, it got over it helped me get over imposter syndrome, to just say, well, of course I should be doing this, because why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I? Because I want to do it, because I think I can do a good job. I don't care if I don't fit the profile or have the pedigree. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you got to do, honestly, in any field, honestly, in any aspect of life, but certainly in audio. The only way to really make a dent, to really define yourself, is to just forget about what other people are trying to define for you. And honestly, that's in your own imagination. Most people don't even think about you, in a real sense. Like everybody's up in their own head.
Hmm.
And a lot of times we worry about what other people think of us. And so we don't do anything. We don't try anything. We don't pour our guts into it. We always hold back or try to mimic what we see other people doing, as opposed to saying, nah, I'm just going to barf myself onto the page, or onto the onto the recording, or onto the screen. I'm going to see what I can create, and not really think too hard about where it fits into some bigger picture, or how you stack up against some better known artist. It's not a competition. It's more like a free for all. And I think that's the way to approach it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to see people who they aspire to, or if they use them as a model, and then they're like, "Oh, they have the things that I want and I want to work towards." So then you feel like you now have this gap that you're trying, or thing you're trying to reach for, but they're doing the same thing. Like they have their things that they're trying to work for, and they feel inadequate in their own way. And then when you meet these people and you talk to them, and you're like, "Oh, they're kind of just like me. They're just like normal people."
Yeah.
But a lot of times people tend to idolize somebody because they have either somewhere they're at in life, or they have this much money, or this much credibility, or this much whatever, and they're always just trying to work for that. But the thing is, it's like you can't compare yourself to anybody. You have to sit down and talk with yourself and be like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? And use that as a thing. It's like achieve your own goals, not try to achieve the goal that someone else has already done. That's kind of doesn't really do anything for you in the end.
Exactly.
Like you can use someone as a model as like this is kind of like in the frame of where I want to be, but in the end, your journey is always going to be different than everyone else's. So
Yeah. Jumping back to Maks, I mean, you in the same way that you you're not autodidact. You jumped in early in life and started trying to figure it out yourself, and you just would do things. You would, and the second thing you did for us was a trailer for a Hyperion Strings Elements, I want to say.
Hyperion Strings Elements,
I want to
exactly.
say I think it was Ambius Prime because that around like when I first came on
Ambis
board.
Prime, and then Streamer, I think also.
Shimmer.
Yeah, because I remember when I was first coming on board and I was doing the walkthrough for Ambius Prime, I remember using a lot of the cool visuals that you gave us as sort of the backdrop for the UI and the on the walkthrough and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I do remember Shimmer too because I remember when I was sharing some stuff on socials, I remember using that video. I was like, oh, like because everything you've ever done is very visually interesting, especially the Hyperion stuff too is very very beautiful and cinematic, especially for the elements because you got some footage of someone playing out in sort of like a nature landscape and kind of sort of like the Elysium harp, but more like in the forest versus observing the forest from a distance kind of thing.
Yeah.
I remember when I also came to a local musical university with people to shoot some B-roll footage with music instruments.
Hmm.
So I shared a little bit of money with them and told them, hey guys, just to play, just to experiment what you're doing. I took just maybe one light source with me just to make some cool close-up shots of instruments.
Hmm.
And then actually here in this room, I was shooting some additional, I think, macro shots with photography because I took the pictures from your behind the scenes from the actual recording session, and I made the photos of it. I printed them, and then I made something like a shot when it's the camera going on top of it, just to show a little bit of the story how it was created.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, I love that stuff. And it came out great and really cool. Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you tried to tell the story because that's always a very important part, I think. Because a lot of times, people just see like, oh, here's this instrument. But there's a lot that goes into it, from like the why we wanted to create it to how we created it to the creation of it and and then trying to give this tool to people for them to be creative with it. So that's cool that you think that deeply about it because it's going past just the product.
Yeah. I think you and I had talked about this was, a couple of years ago, when you were doing the footage for Elysium. We talked about, how there were a lot of old ruins in Ukraine. And I kind of got my start in field recording, just, urban exploration, going into old bunkers and abandoned factories and things like that. And you had a lot of that growing up in sort of accessible to you. What was it like? I mean, you did more video footage, I think, of that because you hadn't started really field recording until honestly Swords to Ploughshares.
Exactly. Before the Swords to Ploughshare, I had this field recorder, and I was mostly doing something like I don't know. I was doing some experiments in the subway or during the rain or just something. I don't know, something that I didn't want it to use in a commercial way. I was just doing it mostly for myself, maybe for my music, but not for samples that much. I had a lot of experience creating samples, but when I was creating samples, I was mostly using different layers of VST plugins, different effects and stuff like that, just to create something unique. And then maybe a little bit, maybe 20 or 25% of material was added on top as layers of my field recordings. But after Swords to Ploughshare, I realized that there are so much more opportunities in terms of creativity in actual field recordings, because before that time I had big background in music production, not in commercial production, but mostly in electronic music and in creating digital sound design and I was aware how it works from A to Z. And then I realized that when we can record something, actually, we can add, we can even capture a moment of time in this, and we can capture some feelings, so emotions. And even at first sight, maybe if it will sound generic, but when you will listen more deeply, you can find some unique vibration in this. And if you can add some story to it, it can turn out in really something interesting, and this message can be heard by a lot of people.
Just to that point, I want to talk about the genesis of Swords in a little bit, but to your point, when you started sending the audio recordings that you were making out during the day after the air raid started, the one thing that struck me was that noticed that like there are these crows near you in
Mhm.
in a lot of the places you're recording. They sound so different than the crows here or the ravens here. They had a
Really?
unique, yeah, they have a really unique song, and it was beautiful. And it's there in a lot of the city environment sounds that you've got. Even even during the raids, that they would react to the sound. And
The birds are sound different.
yeah, your crows just sound. I don't know if they were ravens or crows, but they just had
Crows.
a much more unique kind of language to them, or quality.
Mm.
It's they had. I mean, I get birds do that all over the world, but it struck me as like this common element everywhere. But even there's a unique feeling and quality to them. And just hearing that animal sound in the context of an urban environment and this war, often in the distance, but often really up close, that the humans weren't the only people enduring this or in the midst of this, that it just was this total, I don't know, this feeling that
That you are here.
yeah, I mean, war footage and war audio, I think, have a certain quality that draws you in, and yet they're separated from everyday life. But when suddenly it's just, it's like in some of them you had explosions in the background. It sounded
Yeah.
like maybe a few miles off, and then you hear the sounds of people still going about their lives because they have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like talking about this, there is life, the life is keep going here. So we can hear a raid, and we still need to go somewhere. We need still to do something. We need people need to go to to job. They need to do their daily duties. They need to live life. And not every time when there is an area raid, there is an actual threat, but most of the time there is a threat. So I remember even when there were a lot of explosions where the Russian forces, they were maybe 15 kilometers from Kiev. I remember they were shooting artillery, and I still remember this moment when I walking outside the big supermarket, and I keep my recorder with me, and I just stay near to the supermarket, and I click rec, and I hear the one explosion, the other explosion, and people just going here and there, and they just, oh, it's not here, like, okay, we are alive, it's good, and people still going, still walking. And
Uh-huh.
I realized that it was a little bit different, yeah. But it depends on the situation, because sometimes when you realize that it's really close to you, for example, I have experience of seeing the missile tails outside my window. So for example, when you look outside your window, you can see the tail of an actual missile, and it's just flying this or there. And then when you can be a witness of the situation when the actual missile or the fragment of the drone hit the building, which is just 1 kilometer from where you live, and you realize that there are people living inside this building. And when you go in the morning and see the actual building, you starting to look differently and feel different during the next time when you hear explosions, because you realize this street that is a real treat. It's not just a sound somewhere.
Yeah, that's like
So
maybe a 10-minute walk away. I mean, over here, as silly as it sounds, we use miles. And so I think when we hear the term kilometers, it clouds it. But
It's
like
different.
15 kilometers, that's basically what, about 8, 9 miles? I mean, that's
Yeah.
a 10-minute drive on the freeway, and that's where the Russian line
Where?
was.
Yeah, exactly. They were in European. And where I was located at that time, it was the part of the city closer to this location. So it was the district, which was, yeah, like maybe 15 kilometers, like you say, like 9 miles or something like that. And during that time, I even remember there was a big billboard on the road outside the city. It's like a road between the city and the other districts, which is not a part of the city. So I remember the time when I needed to drive to the apartments of my relatives just to check if they are okay. And I remember we were driving through this billboard and it was okay. But when we returned home, maybe in a few hours, it was totally destroyed. And then I realized that we were driving through this point maybe in 15 or 20 minutes before it was totally destroyed. And I remember then there was a place where cars were parked and there was a location of a post office, and there were a total mess. Like cars were burned and it hit this post office. So it was like I think it was an artillery thing at that time. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it sounds. I talk about it with a smile on my face because I try to refocus myself. But this is really scary when you are there and when you realize that your life is on the line, even in the city during this time, and you don't know what will happen next. You don't know if Russian will invade here, if they will enter the city or not, if there will be water, if there will be electricity, if there will be enough of food, because in the stores at that time there were some limitations and some of the stores were closed, and it was just unclear what will be the next, because I even remember that some military machines, they entered the city and the actual Russian soldiers were in Kiev. Not a lot, but maybe a few of them, and they were like ghosts here. Like they came from nowhere, and then they were cut by local defense forces, but still they were here in Kiev, you know. So it was really tough.
Yeah. When you were out and about recording, I mean, just in your daily life, you just had your recorder with you. You were telling me a story about when there was a missile strike not far from you, and you went to see it, and you had, well, put it differently. Like in field recording, doing, or just even just normal urban exploration, you're afraid of getting arrested. You're afraid of getting caught, and you're sneaking into places you shouldn't be, even if they're abandoned, or you're afraid of getting hurt. But that's totally different than what you had experienced, which was you were just out recording, and yet because of what was going on, because there were foreign soldiers trying to infiltrate your city and saboteurs, you had kind of a frightening run-in you set up related to that, didn't you?
I don't know. I just had something like a feeling inside myself that this is my mission here that I need to do because I cannot do anything else. I was like a little bit paralyzed because of this situation, and I realized that this is the best I can do in terms of my experience, in terms of what I can do. And that's how I can spread this message through my audience and through the people around the world. And I realized that there will be a small step in the direction that people can change, can think different. It will be a little change still. So I realized that with every move that I did at that time, it was a little move in the direction that people can hear what's happening here. People can think in a different way about it, especially musicians that are in a lot of times far away from politics, and they can change their thinking, and maybe they can somehow affect on the situation. They can call something, they can do something, they can go outside some protests against Russian aggression, and they can stop working with people who are supporting the other side. So I think it was my mission to spread this information in this direction. And inside myself, I felt that I will do this because I also had my family with me, my old mother and my girlfriend at the time, and I knew that I needed to protect them, and I just needed to make sure that they will have things they need, because at that time there were moments when gas stations were closed and there were no gas at all. So I remember the time when in the car there were maybe 10% of total gas available inside the car, and I wasn't even I didn't knew if I will get the gas, if I will be able to drive the car outside the city at the time. So yeah, and I remember my friends came to me. They entered the local defense forces. So I still remember the time when they came to me with AK-47 to my apartments, and it was
Damn.
totally different. And they came to me with drones, and they even didn't knew how to use the drones, but they knew that they needed to check the environment in terms of some enemies. So I helped them a little bit just to show how it works. It was just first days of invasion. Yeah, this is what I remember. But then the story, what was happening next.
Yeah. When you got the chance, I mean, there was a period where, I mean, it was basically right around the winter time. I think it was late spring, and you felt like you needed to go potentially west when things looked really tense around Kiev, and you went into the mountains, the Carpathian Mountains. What was it
Yeah.
like to have that contrast where suddenly it's quiet?
Oh, before the last moment, I didn't want it to leave the city. I just wanted to stay here and to be with people here and to do what I can do. At that time, I was even helping some homeless people. When I saw someone homeless, I was trying to give him a little bit of money, or just to buy a little bit of food, or to help some old people that were living inside my building. I just wanted to be useful, because at that time I had a lot of energy inside myself, and my girlfriend, she were more afraid of what will happen next, and my mom too. So that was the reason when I decided to be with them when they will drive to the west, because I didn't want it to let them go alone, because it was a pretty long road from Kiev to the west of Ukraine, to the more safer place, and uh, you didn't knew what can happen, because there were roadblocks, there were soldiers, and it was very difficult situation all around. And I just decided, okay, I will go there for some period of time, and I will see what will be next. And that's how I continued my journey. And on the other side, on the west, it was much more different. It was much more calm, and mostly it was just like a regular life. But there were a lot of people from different regions, and I saw people from Irpin, from Bucha, who were escaping this place because the Russian soldiers, they were already there, or maybe a few kilometers from there. So those people were already in situation when they lost their homes, they lost their cars, they like lost like everything in this. And it was difficult to go through this all emotionally around. At that time, I was not able to do anything like music, or it was just a time when I was trying to do as much as possible something to help Ukraine, to help people here, and to spread the information online through my social media, just to spread awareness and so people can be informed of the very tough situation here. So was the only goal at that time, and
Mhm.
I had a feeling inside myself and a hope that it will over maybe in a month or 2 or 3. I didn't knew it will take like 2 years until like now, because
Mhm.
it's already almost 2 years since the invasion of Ukraine, wide scale invasion.
Can you tell us more about well, first, since we're talking about when you were in the mountains and that kind of, it was only I think a couple of weeks you're saying you were up there, but you did a little bit of recording, and that's in Swords, and it's an extremely poignant contrast, I think, to then what you came right back to, which is, I mean, some of the most sort of traumatic recordings you've got, came after you return home from there. But
Mm-hmm.
just tell, I mean, can you tell us more, basically more of the experience, the different things you recorded, what it was
Mm-hmm.
like, where, sort of like, what were the environments like? What did it feel like?
I think I was just trying to record as much different sounds as possible to capture the atmosphere of one situation of another. So I remember I was trying to record some train sound when I was near to the train. From what I remember now, I remember the time when I was trying to capture some interesting moments inside the forest when there was a situation which was in the opposite of explosions. It was something like ambience and something more calm, and I was just trying to listen how the little parts of the water drops, and I was just trying to catch some calm moment there. Then I remember I was trying to find something like an atmosphere of the night when there is a really calm night and there is no people there, because it's a really different night compared when it was before. Because when there was a peaceful time and there was a night time, you can still hear some people outside or something going on. But in the wartime, the night is really calm and there is like no one. So when you listen to the night at the time when there is no one, it sounds different, and every little move or every little bird or anything in this environment gives a different sound, if you know what I mean. So I remember even the time when the air raid starting to sound, and when there is a time when there is no missiles, no drone, no not everything, just calmness around, and it sounds like the introduction of something. It feels different. And then as for other sounds, I just had some things around me. I had a little revolver near to me when I was just trying to play with in terms of different metallic sounds. Then I had something like, I remember the time when I was just trying to do an experiment, when I just going outside and to record different noises around me. It can be a door sound, it can be a sound of my how I walk, it can be a sound when I hit something like a metallic construction that I see near to me. It can be a sound of the elevator, it can be a noise of the elevator, and it can be a sound of the corridor inside the building. So I was just trying to record as much as possible of different sounds. And then I realized that there is a lot of possibilities during the post production to play with pitch, to play with equalizer, to play with different parameters to play with different effects, and you can tweak sounds and create something totally different, if you know what I mean. So it was really interesting journey for me, and it helped me to refocus myself. And even now I realize that it helped me to stay mentally strong because I had a goal. And every time I heard something new, I heard new sounds that I wanted to capture. So I didn't have the feeling of fear. I had the feeling of, like, let's say, excitement. So when I hear a new sound and I want to capture it in terms of something original. So I believe this experience helped me to refocus and mentally survive in the situation when I was at that time, definitely.
I think the normalcy of the sounds, your environment was. I was talking about this before, but it was one of the striking things you were talking about when you were at the grocery store and there was an air raid, and in one of the sounds in the library, it's just the sound of shopping cart being put away, in one of those little shopping cart corrals, and it's the clang of that metal with combined with an explosion, and it's like this the
Combination.
normalcy and absurdity, terror. And I think that's what's really striking, and if you ever work as a sound designer with old war recordings or, even more modern ones, there's libraries out there for like Apocalypse Now, all the sounds they recorded for that movie. And there's quite a few. And now there's a lot more, where the people go out to the desert and they, shoot machine guns or blow things up. But there's nothing that really captures it in a way that suggests what it really is like for the majority of civilians stuck in these situations, which is,
Exactly.
it's not far away, it's not perfectly captured, it's just there, and it's
Because it's not staged, it's real.
Yeah.
the car alarms, they immediately go off, and it's like this. It brings you back down to, this is not happening in some idyllic platonic sense of war. It's just happening to a neighborhood. It's happening to a town. It's happening to a city. It's just happening to people.
I actually remember also that at one of the evening I just sat down and I decided that I want to add a little bit of sound using synthesizers. And I had some, I don't even remember what exactly synthesizer, but I just tried to record some weird sounds to express my feelings at that time, and then add a lot of effects just to change it a lot in terms of pitch or something like that, just to translate my emotions in sound. So this is also what I added to the source to Ploughshares library. I also added some synthesizers just to make some little variations of. Actually, I was playing with the source to Ploughshare not so long ago, and I realized that it's like an orchestra inside it. You can create a lot of different sounds, and you can mix digital synthesizers, you can mix field recordings, and you have ability to add effects and change a lot of parameters and add arpeggiator, play with LFO and play with different parameters, and you can came up with really unique results. And I'm not saying it's unique like it's something cool unique, it's just something different, and it has some particular feeling that can be like a real instrument that can be used by people if they want to have something different and something not just war related, but something that will have a mix of organic and digital feel. This is what I feel when I'm still using it.
Yeah, you've got
Yeah.
captures of like radio sort of noise and interference and sort of scrambled broadcasts. You've got the ambient recordings out in the environment. You've got sound effects individually captured on your field recording tracks, and then a lot of sound design to kind of bring it together. There's a lot of melodic, sort of like tonal instruments that you can play chromatically, a lot of percussion. And so I think literally, like, you can create whole arrangements that aren't just kind of one trick ponies. I mean, you can hear it in a lot of the demos where all the elements are created from the library. You can, there's bass, that's what's fascinating. It's like it's taking the whole environment and the whole emotional experience you had and like bring it into a playable multi-instrument.
Multi-instrument, exactly, because I even created tracks. Like my goal and my task was, I wanted to create the whole track using only Swords to Ploughshares, and it was really interesting. Not because I wanted to use it just one instrument, but I just wanted to learn about my own instrument more. And when I realized that there are a lot of possibilities, it was really interesting to realized it. And I actually created an album already using the Swords to Ploughshares, and I maybe added a little bit of orchestral elements, actually using Soundiron instruments too. And maybe around of 90% of material in this album was created using Swords to Ploughshares. It's not yet released, but I really hope it will happen soon. And I just want to make sure the final stage of mastering will be how I feel it, and I can let it go and just drop it online for people to listen. Because actually, I want to add a note that every time I return to this, it's sometimes hard for me to work on it and to listen to it again because I have some memories and feelings. Sometimes it's difficult to work on it because I wouldn't say it's like bad emotions, it's just hard memories.
Take you back to times where maybe that weren't
Mm-hmm.
such good times. I like one of the things I personally find very interesting about it is, sometimes people growing up, maybe they're living in a situation where, it's traumatic and they use something like art or music or something to help them be distracted from a situation that's like that. And I find it interesting that you took this and by using the process of recordings and all that and then making music with it, and then like you're saying now when you hear it, it almost kind of takes you back. I'm sure it's probably like that for certain people too who make music maybe in a time where things aren't so bad. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you take those emotions and you put it into music, and then you listen back and it's like, man, at that time I remember I was going through this and it was very
Mm-hmm.
traumatic. You
Mm-hmm.
use that as a way to express yourself
Mm-hmm.
in those times. But for you, it's even more because it's like you're not only are you making music with those sounds, but
Yeah.
those sounds were actually captured moments of those times that were making you
I
feel that way. So it's
I remember then when I was listening to music with some tough emotions, I realized that I am not alone. And the creator of the music who created it, I think he was trying to express his feelings, but for me, it was helpful. So I think maybe some people who will listen to this music, they will feel that they are not alone and they have someone who can tell a story which is similar to them in some way. So I think it will find its listener. And I want to say that after making this, I realized that now it's time to create even something more peaceful and something more with calm atmosphere, just to make people be more calm and more peaceful rather than something more dark and something more I don't know, something more hard. But I wouldn't say it can be something just very light or something, but I just want to bring different emotions, maybe, if you know what I mean, with what I want to do next, because I feel a lot of struggle and I feel we need to refocus ourselves on something with more like a hope, with a bright hope. And I believe there are a lot of things that can help to do this with music.
yeah, yeah, totally. Especially when, like you were saying earlier, how when you would go out and in those more calm environments and you're really listening for sounds or just really being in the moment of the calm, with with everything else going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something I hope people take away, because I think it's very easy for people to just get like, oh, everything's fine, everything's
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't have to worry about anything, and they kind of don't have those moments of just going for a walk and looking at the trees, actually looking and being in the moment, even if it's something simple as just a walk or being out in a more open environment. Like I think that probably made you really appreciate just even a moment like that where you can just kind of sit and be like, it's quiet, and appreciate it a little bit
Yeah,
more for what it is. I think
exactly.
I think more
Exactly.
more people could take away from that, because it's like you never know what can
What
happen,
will happen? Yeah.
and to appreciate things.
And I realized that just in our life, we just need to think that maybe we don't need something, maybe some things that we see and the goals that society trying to put on us are not important. And maybe what we already have and can enjoy is enough to be happy. And sometimes I realize that even in music, people try to make music to be super popular or to be super successful, but at the same time, it loses, they lose themselves, you know? So I 100% sure that if you just create and even you just create what you personally like, and if it makes you happy, it will make happy other people too. So the goal, I think, is just create what you like and try not to think how to be good for someone else.
Yeah, I think a lot of people glorify the process too much, or try to, like, get that thing you always hear where it's like, if I just had that one piece of gear,
Hmm.
that would allow me to make the best piece of music I've ever made. And then they get
Hmm.
it, they play around with it, it's fun, and then
Hmm.
maybe they just
Exactly.
don't really like it as much anymore, or just fall away from it. And then there's the next shiny object that's dangled in front of them. Hey, if you just had this thing. And it's, I mean, because of course, obviously we make virtual instruments where we want people to have different types of tools. We're always trying to, create something to inspire. And that's what, it should be. Like, you find something that connects with you. Oh, I feel like you can hear music in your head already with it, versus like, oh, like this thing is, like there's the new iPhone. Here's the new iPhone.
Hmm.
Make sure you get that new iPhone. And it's just a phone. Like, think about
Yeah,
when we were, younger, and the first cell phone came out. It's like, oh wow, I can call somebody and not have to have this giant dangly tangled cord, or like rotary, people forget about
I had
stuff like
this
that.
phone when I was a kid. Exactly.
Yeah, and so it's like it makes you appreciate that, but then it's easy to just kind of like, oh, get sucked into that. Oh, I need this new thing, but at the end of the day, it's like, why do we all start wanting to create music? It's just because we loved the feeling of, I still remember the first time I ever jammed with a drummer, actually showing them, all right, here's the riff, and then you hear them play like the drum beat back, and then you're just like, that feeling of like, oh wow, like we're actually making something. This is so cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of lost now, is a little bit, especially with how it's so easy to just get something new, get the new thing. While it's great, it's also, I think it's easy to get caught into that whole like needing things versus
Yeah.
like, what, like if someone was to say, okay, you can have three things and that's all you can have for making music, like you'd probably be a little bit more particular about it. You're probably like, well, I don't need that, that new other weird thing, or or that cool little whatever. It's like bare bones. What do you need? Meat and potatoes to get the job done.
Exactly.
And you appreciate that more, I think.
And I want to add a little note that sometimes when you have limitations and you don't have a lot, it makes you focus more on what you have. And with this little tool, you can experiment and create much more. And I
Yeah.
realized that this is it. Even if you have something like a simple recorder or simple microphone, you learn how to tweak it, how to make it better.
Hmm.
And with every small instrument in the similar situation, you can create some unexpected things.
Yeah, actually learning the tool, because nowadays, people might just like, oh, that seems cool. Let me just get that. They don't read the manual. They don't know anything. And then they have this expectation of what they think it should do. And then they're like, wait, well, how come this doesn't do that? It's like, did you actually understand what you were getting yourself into?
Yeah,
And like a lot of times people they're not really taking the time to learn, or maybe it does do that thing plus 10 other things. They just didn't really take the time to learn it because they, get a new plugin, load it up. Maybe they forget they even had it. I'm guilty of that. I've done that too. Where it's just there's so many things out there, and it's easy to just kind of get lost in it. But it's like when you actually really take the time to get a tool, learn how to use it fully, that it's like it means a little bit more to you, and you can get more out of it versus just kind
yeah,
of
you can become a professional player of this particular instrument.
yeah.
I realize that nowadays, when you have access to a lot of different virtual instruments, you can have like a real set of different musicians in your hands. And I realized that when I was growing up and trying to create music, I was always thinking, oh, I somehow need to find this particular sample, or I need to find a particular musician. But right now, I realize that with virtual instruments, I have like all types of musicians in my hand that I can use to express my emotions the way I wanted, as if I was like a music producer. But at the same time, I realized that we sometimes just need a simple instrument to express our emotions, and we don't need it all. So it just depends on our mood, but it's still great that we have access to it all because we have a lot of possibilities, and it's
Oh
beautiful
yeah.
time.
I think
Yeah,
that's what it's about. It's in the beginning, there was this feeling that to be able to make the music you wanted, you either had to be rich or know somebody. And trying to record and turn instruments that we could find around us and turn those into things that we could use at any time. I think the first thing I sampled, it turned into a real instrument, a whole instrument, was the granny piano, because it was just in my living room and it sounded really pretty, but in a way that was really kind of hard to define. And I'm not a good piano player, but I can certainly sequence and bring out what I hear in my head, and it was a way of doing that. And now, like with when you're making a library like this, same way you did with swords, you get in there and you take it apart. You take that experience or that instrument apart. You don't just get the main articulations or hit it. You damage it a little bit. You wear it out.
Mhm.
You explore it and pull that whole experience apart so that it's all there later. Because that's the thing, is you're trying to capture a thing in a moment in time, and you don't get to go back. So get everything you can out of it that you can, fully
Exactly.
capture it so that you've got that. It's beyond just a picture or a video capture of a moment. It's as close as you can get to going back and being able to, whether it's a musical performance, that, or a library that you've created out of like a player playing, or yourself playing, or an object that you've just experimented with, that you just like the way, if you hit it a certain way, it makes a weird noise that you like. I guess that's the thing, is like when you're even writing a song, don't be afraid to like get in there, even if certain aspects that you have in the mix are hidden, because you feel yourself in them, and you feel like every sort of bit of surface area that you can inject your creativity into makes it that much more of a little monument to that feeling you were trying to evoke. I think that just try to pour yourself all into it. Don't just, try to put out a facade musically or artistically, but try to bleed into it a little bit.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you want. It's like you want to. I think the best music I feel for me that I've ever made, where I feel like wow, like when you kind of get a little bit, it's almost like a meditative state where like you just kind of get lost in it. You're not thinking, oh, does this sound cool? Are people gonna, it's like when like there's times I've made music and like a couple hours went by and I was like, wait, kind of, it's almost like you come out of a deep meditation and you almost feel like what happened, like you look at the clock and it's like, oh, it's 2:30 in the morning. Like, how come I'm not tired or anything? You're just like so into it, and I think
Hmm.
if you can channel that, when the muse hits sort of thing, like that's when it's like the best is gonna come out. And like you said, like really getting lost in it and not being afraid of like, well, like questioning every little move. It's like those are the things like, man, like if I could harness that and be able to just like turn the switch on, that would be nice. But it's one of those like when you experience that, it's like when you listen back on the music, you remember that kind of thing. Like I still have riffs I've written where like when I hear it, I'm like, I remember sitting down, working out the parts and everything and being like, man, like this was like really coming together, and you get in that flow state. And I think a lot of that is because you're not thinking about, is this the right move? Should I do that? You're just kind of going for it.
I think this conversation is a good example and introduction to a feeling that I have right now that makes me feel that we can be all together in one studio and create something, not just for the record or for a contract, but just to express ourselves together and have fun. This is the feeling that I have right now.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly like I like those are some of the best times I've ever had making music. I mean, it's nice to be able to sit by yourself and kind of get lost in your own head and just kind of work out stuff. But there's something to say for sitting in a room with a few people and just bouncing off ideas. Someone's off in the corner just noodling on some instrument, and you're like, whoa, 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 what was that? And then they're like, oh no, I'm just dicking off and just playing whatever. You're like, no, no, do that again, and then someone else gets something else, like, and then you just start to see things shape out, and
Mhm.
and those are always the cool times where you're watching something happen in front of you, and you're kind of like, wow, like I don't know what's going on right now, but this is really cool, and that stuff I think is always going to be special because
Yeah.
you're watching something unfold, especially if it's around with people who you like being around. You'll say you're in a band or you're just with some
Exactly.
music minded friends or whatever, and I think that stuff is always going to be very special just because it took that environment with people thinking the way that they were thinking, feeling how they were feeling, all for that to happen
Hmm.
and create that, because that probably wouldn't have that certain musical ideas or songs. I'm sure when the Beatles were in the room, and is probably the sort of the same thing. Hey, wait, what's that? And it's just you just watch things unfold, and it takes a certain type of scenario and group of people, I think, to make certain things like that
Yeah.
happen.
The only way I could really ever describe it, when you're jamming or when you're working on a piece that you do know well, but you know it well enough that you don't have to think about it so much anymore. The air gets thick. Like when you're in a group of people playing together, the air, I don't know what it is, but it's like gravity changes and the air just feels like soup, and you just feel like you're in the midst of this sort of miasma, this sort of connective tissue between everybody. You're no longer like just this isolated person kind of with your instrument hoping to kind of like fit into what's going on around you. You're just suddenly in it and you're floating in it. Those are rare special moments unless you can just sort of be in a place where you can let go like that musically with a group of people
Yeah.
Mhm.
or yourself, but where you lose the boundaries of yourself. Your skin doesn't feel like a surface anymore. It feels more like just a cloud that kind of blends with what's going on around you musically or beyond musically.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like everyone's sort of like connecting with the same mind and like homogenizing creatively, and it's just like, yeah, it's cool when it seems like everyone's kind of like clicks, and everyone's like, all right, they're all on the same page. It's not like that. That's why when you always see those situations where there's that one guy like, I don't know, man, I really think we should. It's like everyone's just kind of like in it, and that's when I think
Yeah.
some of the greatest things are made.
Yeah, I think even nowadays when we have access to internet, and I just found myself on an idea that it's also possible to do something maybe on remote, because Mike shared with me some experience that he had previously with recording session using streaming equipment for audio, and I realized that it's really cool maybe sometimes just to take something like a cup of tea or everything and just turn on the camera and just have ability to stream the sound and just play with something without any goal to create a song or something, but maybe in this environment there will be created something.
I think it's pretty close. We did a session to Japan the other day, and the lag was close. It was like maybe a half second when it was good.
Mhm.
Or it's felt like it because I could hear the loop back through the person in the booth at the other end, so I could hear myself. And sometimes it would lag a while, but sometimes it'd be really close.
Mhm.
And I think we're getting better and better by the day, especially with gigabit internet. I think
Mhm.
where you could actually literally jam with people on the same song in real time, like you're in a band. I think we're 5 years from that tops. I think we're getting
Mm-hmm.
closer and closer.
It's really interesting. And the technology of artificial intelligence, so-called intelligence, is really interesting because I had a conversation on the other day with the guy who is involved in creating different things for artificial intelligence for music. And he shared with me some information like I'm not a good specialist in this myself, but he told me that at the current moment of time, there is a thing which is called imitation. So the artificial intelligence cannot replace the human, but it can imitate the human. And as for now, mostly it's around from 30 to 40% of a human. So it cannot be a human. It can imitate it, but it cannot have the whole creative potential of a human as for now. But he told me that in the coming future there is some machine learning using mathematics, and he told me something about quantum, and he told me that quantum artificial intelligence will be different and much more closer to the human, and it will have ability to create and generate music with ability to edit it, not just like when you type the prompt and it gives you a result. You will be able to actually tell him like I want to change something in percussion, or I want to change something in the melody, or I want to add a little bit more of this or that. I don't know if it's good or not, but the future will be really different, I think, for all of the people.
I think though the best music isn't because it's technically good or because the people creating it are masters. It's because they feel it, an emotional sort of outlet that creates the whole sort of creative ignition that leads to whatever art they are creating. It's that impetus, that impulse to create and to create in a certain direction. And it's not just random, it's not just sort of raw and generative. It's there's an intent behind it that's drawn from a feeling,
Mhm,
whether it's a feeling toward mimicry, but more often than not, it's usually from a place of joy or pain,
mhm,
honestly, or
Hmm.
or even just aesthetic appreciation. You want to you like a certain feeling. You like, you're playing an old vintage organ that reminds you of, say, a church or some old song you liked, and then so you kind of just go off of that. It's still, whether it's you're reminiscing or you're sort of like feeling an aesthetic, or you're sad or you're happy or you're angry, it's coming not from an intellectual place, not really. Not, I mean, good music rarely comes from a purely intellectual place. It can't, I don't think.
It
it,
comes
it
from emotions and
has to
experience.
start in an emotion or a desire more than anything else,
Mhm.
I think. I mean, I there are a lot of really great technical musicians, but when they really create their best work, it's not coming from some technical place.
Yeah, because when I still listening to some old records of Beatles or Nirvana, they still sounds good. They are not perfect. Like for example, I was listening to this Nirvana Unplugged,
Hmm.
this live album, and it's really just like an album recorded in the garage.
Hmm.
And it has emotions and it has some vibration. It's not perfect, but it's really cool. And when I quickly switched to the studio version of their popular song,
Oh, Smells Like Teen Spirit.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I compared it, and the studio recording was not cool anymore because it lacks something like energy. And when I switched back to the live album, it was much more interesting for me to listen to.
Dude, I totally agree. Like the Alice in Chains Unplugged is probably one of my favorite live recordings videos ever. And I'm just a huge Alice in Chains fan. And there's songs on there that I like the unplugged version better. because
Yeah,
the album will maybe have like distorted guitars and like certain vocal harmonies and that, but there's something about sort of like it's like you can see someone wearing a suit and fancy
hmm,
hair and all that, but it's
yeah,
like then like you're stripping all that away and you're just seeing like the skeleton of the thing,
exactly,
like the
exactly.
core foundation of the song, and you're really hearing it for what it is. And it's like when people say like, oh, if you can have an acoustic guitar or a piano of a chords and a melody, if that sounds good there, it's probably going to sound good in any
Mhm.
context, whether it's like a full
Exactly.
band or orchestra or whatever it is, whatever kind of any way that you're going to orchestrate it. But that's what I agree with you on that, because you're hearing it for what it is, and if it's
Hmm.
good and
It's
it's
good.
simplistic way
Yeah.
like that, of course it's going to sound good when you put it in the studio and you got quad track guitars and mic'd up drums and you're hearing it all, not even, I wouldn't even say polished. I mean, definitely way more produced than something like hearing people just playing on acoustic guitars and singing. Like you're hearing it for what it is, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's still a deliberate, like I guess, like for my, like, there's two albums that I remember like really being struck by that aspect. It was actually the Stone Temple Pilots Unplugged performance. It's sort of like I'd always been a fan of them, but like that suddenly just, it wasn't suddenly this polished rock. It was like, okay, these songs really have a personal meaning. They're not just like creative, sort of like artistic constructions. They're like, these people are trying to express something that's real in their lives, in their minds.
Hmm.
Hmm.
um and then I think for me the greatest like Nine Inch Nails record ever is Still, where it's not live per se, but it absolutely has these live raw elements. It's they're mostly existing songs, but that are just kind of acoustically arranged, kind
Hmm.
of. There's almost like a Tom Waitsy kind of vibe to that album, where it just feels like a lot of the noise in the room, a lot of the sort of
Hmm.
textures being explored there aren't about like how good can it sound. It's more like just how there can it sound. I don't know if
Yeah,
that.
imperfections helps to make it more touching.
Yeah, it's like that's why Johnny Cash covered Hurt, and you hear it in that interpretation, and you still hear just as much emotion as what Trent Reznor put in to the original. It's funny how a lot of people think that it's the other way around, that like Nine Inch Nails covered a Johnny Cash song, but it's that same thing. It's like that's probably why. And then you see the video and like how he's sort of like using his life and putting the visuals together with the music and just hearing his tone, and it's just as emotionally touching as the original. And I think that's just it. I think that type of thing is just a testament to the songwriter. Like Trent Reznor is obviously great at writing lyrics and being able to convey emotion in a very simplistic way, just like any other artist who can take a simplistic form of music and really just like connect with you, because I think it's coming from a true source, and that's something AI will never be able to do, because
Exactly.
it's just the nature of AI.
I'm thinking what could be an instrument, a virtual instrument, if it was created by Rick Rubin? What kind of instrument it could be?
It would be someone sitting in a studio saying, "Hey, what if we try taking that guitar and just like flipping it, let's smash it into the wall, or like a picture of rainbows on the wall. How does that make you feel? All right, now put that into a guitar riff." Yeah, no, he's one of those people, like, because he's not a musician, but he's someone who I think someone who can appreciate, like a good producer. I think just understands what they like about music and what's good about music, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, oh, hey, maybe play the instead of that third, maybe play it like, it's like that. It's like a film composer talking to a director. It doesn't need to be technical, or I really think you should transpose that key. It's just like it's more feelings,
Hmm.
and being able to communicate feelings. It puts your mind in a different space versus like maybe you should try playing that in Dorian. I think that would be good. It's like then now you're thinking technically versus like someone saying like, imagine you're sitting on stairs. It's like 2 a.m. You've had a few drinks. Your girlfriend just broke up with you. Like how would that make you feel?
Yeah.
It's a little bit more open to interpretation versus sort of like, here's this cage I'm going to put you in now, have fun with it.
Yeah, but that it is that interpretation you're after.
Yeah.
It's that taking, because I guess that's the thing, is like there's only so many ways your heart can break, but there's an infinite number of ways to express that. And I mean, that's like a good percentage of all music is essentially that. feeling, but all of the things that have gone into it for that person and for all of society that that person lived in and all of human history that created that society. It's like you're the tip of the spear in that emotion and how you express it. I think that's why there will never be sort of the last song written or the perfect song written. And, I'm not going to nag on AI because that, one day, if we do a good enough job, maybe AI will be a person like us in a sense, but rather that as a concept of a thing that's going to replace musicians or all music, I think that's silly. I guess a way of looking at that is there's so much music being produced now. There's, I don't know, billions of songs just on the internet. Probably at least a billion songs out there now.
And people releasing cover version of old songs. And
Exactly. It's
Yeah,
an
there's
unlimited
thousands of songs.
supply.
Yeah, it's like as much as there's babies being born every day, there's probably a song being written or some kind of
and released.
But it's
yeah.
not slowing down. It's not like, oh, okay, we're nearly at the end. It's more like it just one song can spawn a million other songs that as people are inspired by that song and influenced by it.
Mhm.
And there's infinite number of all these influences coming from all these directions, and styles change. And now every style can coexist. Now any kind of music you could want to create, you can create. So it's not like it was in the last century where every decade kind of had these signature sounds. Now, well, you can do those, but then you have all of the possibilities of the present and the future. I think AI can contribute. I think AI can be a useful tool, and maybe eventually even be true authors. But at the same time, that's just more to the pot. There's just it's not going to be something that if we ever, this is just my opinion, but if we ever do establish, say, some relationship with, say, an interstellar species or interdimensional, whatever, eventually, as all things, it will come down to commerce, trade or whatever. If there's ever anything that our species and our planet has to trade with another world, it's our art. That's the one thing I think that will probably always be determined to be the one thing that's really unique about us. We don't just have one kind of art; we have an infinite range of art in all kinds of formats and mediums. We can create art from nothing. We can create music from a couple of sticks. And if you got a microphone, you can create a whole orchestral piece from those couple of sticks if you just do a lot of layering and sound design, etc. I'm not trying to blow smoke up our own asses, although I guess I am. But I do think that that's a thing that humans have that can't ever be really diminished. That isn't just like, well, can we like fly to the stars? I mean, up here, yeah, we can all day long, every day, every
Mhm.
single night. Like that's the thing is we can generate ideas and music and feelings and wind them together into these orchestrated tapestries of thought, of impulse, of emotion, of insight, and then we can share that, and other humans or other beings can take a piece of that away, experience it not just as a fancy piece of noise that, yeah, that feels good, that whatever that you can cry over. I mean, people cry over music all the time. That's not fake, and it's not some kind of appreciation for the quality of the performance or the precision or the intellect behind the orchestration or the composition. It's not that at all. It's real. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't quite give humans credit for. We create art like, and it's not just generative. I mean, we talk about how AI is a great, at making art, but they're good at mimicking art we've already created.
Exactly.
Yeah, just having that ability to wonder or be inspired or just imagine something, like, it's like when you're younger, it's like, what if, this insert whatever,
Yeah.
it's like when you see people who are like I want to do whatever, I want to be a firefighter or whatever, or fly to the moon or create something that's going to change the world. I think that the fact that humans have the ability to have a thought, and if you think about it hard enough, manifest it in a way, and not in like the woo woo way of just like, I'm gonna manifest it, like saying I'm gonna be a billionaire in 30 days. It's like, yeah, that sounds nice, but it's like, I mean, to I think in the term of manifestation, and like having a thought that feels so powerful to you that it puts you on that track of a goal. And I think that's where, like with humans, it's a very powerful thing.
We all have that now. Like when you're in the, you're standing in the shower and suddenly a lyric pops into your head or a beat,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got the whole sound in there. You've got whole orchestration or all the layers. You hear the music in this three-dimensional way that
It's trippy.
yeah, it's just you build it out of nothing, and suddenly it's just it's all there, and then you're racing, to go write it down or hum it into a recorder or sketch it out before you lose it. But we conjure and lose these things constantly. They're
Hmm.
like dreams, and you can have
Yeah.
the most vivid dream, and then you wake up and maybe you write it down,
Mm.
but maybe it just vanishes into the ether. We capture only, I think, a fraction of the art that we create in our minds. It's only when it's so compelling that we can't help it but write it down, at least some of it, and then from there, sometimes that that little bit you get down will spawn an entirely different idea than what you even had in the first place. So it's
Yeah.
like you're throwing out that little spark that starts a wildfire that tears off in a new direction.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a really good analogy comparing it to dreams because that's really how it is. It's like there's this idea and like the whole, like you could wake up and tell someone like, "Oh yeah, like we were here and you were standing there and then this happened and then I forgot." Or like when you hear those stories of like Stephen King like waking up out of a dream and like having this like whole story.
Hmm.
Like it's crazy when you have that, or like there's times where you like written a piece of music in your dream and you wake up and you're like, oh man, it like you were like vibing with it and it sounded so cool. But then when you wake up, you're like, what the hell was that? And that's kind of like how it is. Like if you don't channel that muse when it hits, you're gonna probably regret it later on. Like, man, I had this really cool idea, but now it's gone.
Yeah.
It's like you when you have those great ideas, you have to document them because who knows what could have happened if you would have.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like if I'm starting to write like or a lyric will pop into my head, and by the time I get to write it down, all of like followed through that like a whole verse chorus verse structure. But by the time I get to write it down, I've only got just those key bits that stuck, and that can generate something entirely different in the end. But yeah, it's just it flows so fast, and you gotta you're trying to hang on to little drops of it as it flows through your hands.
Yeah, and it's weird too because it's a different feeling from like when you feel the inspiration and the idea, and then you switch over to now you're trying to like hold on to it, and that inspiration kind of starts to drift because now you're in like trying in remember mode, and versus just like having an instrument in your hand and being able to just kind of pour out that inspiration into the instrument at that time versus
Yeah.
trying to like you're grasping at it like, oh no, don't leave, you know. So it's tough, but yeah, you gotta when it happens, you gotta hold on
Yeah.
tight.
What I think the most important inventions in musical history, more than anything else, it's the first. It's just being able to record, but beyond that, that still only got us so far. The genres were still these very archetypical things, and you really were stuck in these grooves, and it was all very industrial. Who got to record and who didn't. But once the 4-track came, once the ability to multi-track came, then I think that's why in the 60s the range of musical ideas started to explode. And by the time we got to the 80s, it was beyond all measure compared like more music was made in say 1984 than had been created up to that point in a certain sense. More and more people suddenly with the advent of the 4-track and its mainstreaming,
Mhm.
uh, and then beyond that, then digital recording, then and now where we're at now, where you have no limit to the number of tracks and how complex a piece of music you can write, and you have no limit to the kinds of sounds you can capture, either yourself or through virtual instruments. I think that we're at a point now where we are approaching that sort of nexus of can that inspiration be channeled quickly enough to really capture what's in somebody's mind? It's getting closer and closer. I don't think the solution is some kind of mental transference or like, I think really what it is just more people making music like we all do now and expressing themselves and colliding those ideas and techniques to get it out of yourself and into the world. I think that That's really what, to me, like a singularity is in terms of art and music, is that anything is possible from anybody's point of view. Like whatever their unique their unique view on it is, or their unique aesthetic ideals are, they can express any kind of music they want without limits. And I think that's where we really see how creative humans can be.
Mhm. Max, I want to ask you,
Mhm.
when do you feel inspiration tends to strike you? Is it usually when you're sitting down working on music, or do you feel you tend to get ideas doing other things, even if you're out doing field recording? If you're ever hearing a sound, does that ever like inspire you as you're recording it? Like, oh, like this sound, I could really see this being used for something. Or is it usually like when you're at the studio, away from the studio? How do you tend to channel inspiration?
Yeah, most of the time I feel like when I have some experience in my life and when I just sit somewhere and I have a lot of things in my head, in some particular moment, I feel like I need just to express them.
Mhm.
It can be just a quick demo track, or I want to write something like a draft lyrics or anything. And this is the time when it motivates me to create. And the other time when I feel that I want to create something, it's when I feel friendly and good atmosphere. For example, as we have now, I just, when you talk, I just feel like, what can we create,
Mhm.
inside of my head, because it brings me inspiration. So, for example, even sometimes when everything is calm before the sleep and I lay in bed and some thoughts come into my head, I can start creating something in my head. And I miss this feeling daily sometimes because I don't have those emotions anymore. So, for example, when I listen to some music and when it reflects some of my emotions, I start in feeling that I want to create something and I just don't want to copy it. I just want to create it in my own way. For
Mhm.
example, if I hear this song with some particular lyrics, I find similar situation, but I want to share my story. Or when I hear the music that I love so much, I want to create something maybe a little bit similar, but then I feel like, oh, I can mix it with another idea and it can be something else, in the end. So this is the
Yeah.
time when I feel that I want to create something. But a lot of the times when I lack inspiration, I just sit down and, for example, I need something new, something like a new instrument, something like maybe new virtual instrument, or just open a new preset and just try to play, just to make some random moves. Same thing with recorders. I just can record some random things, and then during this time, I find something like a little thing that I can catch and then move forward.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Let your fingers and the sounds guide you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you have a solution, say in a chemical reaction. You've got a solution, and all you need is, and if it's a solution that can grow crystals, you just need one little impurity in there, and suddenly, you find that one little detail, and suddenly the whole idea, crystal structure kind of grows off of it.
Exactly. And that's when we will return to the motivation when I was creating the virtual instrument. I felt like it can be this little thing that will move somebody for something bigger. Maybe someone will hear this instrument and it will inspire him for something super large and the world will be a little bit better. Same
Yeah.
with anything else.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
always the goal.
It's little contributions, but it can lead to just much cooler things that will lead to
Exactly.
future contributions that other people be inspired by. That's
Hmm.
how we keep moving forward.
So it's 2024. What's next for Max? What are some things you got? Some goals? Anything that you're wanting to achieve, either with music, with video, visuals? what are some of your goals that you have planned for the year?
The main goal for me right now is to focus on what I really want to do, because I realize that life is the thing when in life you don't have enough of time and enough of time. And I realized that I really want to focus on music, and music that have a clear, not clear, but a message that will be interesting for people with lyrics. And this is what I want to do. I want to continue writing music, and in parallel to do sound design and to mix it all. I preparing a release of my single very soon. I hope it will be released in February or March. It will include my music and also my voice. So this is like an interesting experiment for me too. This is what I'm planning to continue.
Awesome. Yeah, you definitely got to send us some links once you've put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely got to check it out. Well, Maks, this was a very awesome. Got a little deep on this conversation, you know, but as it should. But yeah, man, it was really awesome having you on. Great to talk with you. You know, really looking forward to everything that you got coming out, and you know, good luck to you with everything. And yeah, man, I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. So, but yeah, we want to thank you for coming on and talking with us.
All right. Peace.
Peace.